Pakistan gives in to demonstrators' demands after weeks of unrest turned violent. Is the government beholden to a fringe religious group? I'm Imran Garta, and today's Newsmaker is the fallout from Pakistan's protests. The streets of Islamabad are finally clear, but at what cost? After weeks of protests, the government caved to a previously little-known political party, Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan. The hardline group demanded a minister resign after accusing him of blasphemy, and under intense pressure, Zahid Hamid indeed stepped down. But many see this as a huge embarrassment for the ruling party, especially with elections next year. Some are now asking if fringe groups can effectively hold the country hostage. So, was this a victory for people power, or does it signal a dangerous demise in democracy? Shoaib Hassan takes a look.
We organized a protest from Lahore to Islamabad, and we reached here in 3 days.
This is the fringe extremist group Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, talking to the Newsmakers early on in their protest. In a matter of weeks, it grew into riots in major cities across the country. The group entered the limelight a few years ago, calling for the hanging of Asia Bibi, a Christian woman accused of blasphemy, and for celebrating Mumtaz Qadri. He was the policeman who assassinated Punjab's governor for trying to defend Asia Bibi. Qadri was eventually hanged for this crime, but Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan still defends him as strongly as they do the Islamic tenets within Pakistan's constitution. That's why they stuck to their latest sit-in, even when the government sent in security forces to break it up.
We are protesting against the operation, the cruel action that the government is carrying out against a lawful demand regarding our holy prophet being made by our religious scholars and our leaders in Islamabad. We curse the government, and our demand is that the operation should be stopped with immediate effect.
That's after the Islamabad High Court had ordered them to clear the streets and end the siege to the capital. The protesters had made a series of demands, but the main objection was the changes in the oath for elected officials that's part of the constitution.
In Parliament, there was a bill about election reforms, and two constitutions were removed from our national constitution, 2 articles, 7B, 7C, about Qadianis. They call themselves Ahmadis.
They said these changes allowed the minority Ahmadiyya sect to pass themselves off as Muslims. Mainstream Muslims maintain they are heretics, and the Tehreek considers them traitors and agents of the West. The protesters demanded the resignation of the country's law minister, Zahid Hamid, for allowing the changes to happen. The government initially refused, but after the use of force backfired, the minister stepped down. Pakistan is already in the middle of a lot of political uncertainty. A top court recently disqualified Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and members of his close family from holding public office. That's after revelations from the leaked documents known as the Panama Papers. In them, the family's assets abroad led to the filing of corruption charges against them. Party leaders openly say the charges are politically motivated, and privately blame them on Sharif's struggle with Pakistan's powerful military. It's all part of Pakistan's existential struggle over who actually runs the country. It's a situation laid bare by a few hundred demonstrators, and ended with what the country's leading newspaper, Dawn, described as a capitulation by the authorities. Which then leads to the question, who actually runs the country? Shoaib Hassan, the Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined from Islamabad by Ahmed Raza Qasuri. He was the legal advisor to former President Pervez Musharraf and also one of the writers of Pakistan's current constitution. Also in Islamabad, Taha Siddiqui. He's Pakistan's bureau chief for France 24. And in Lahore, we have Ahmed Rashid. He's the author of Pakistan on the Brink. Gentlemen, I thank you very much for joining us. Ahmed Razak Qasuri, let me begin with you, sir. These people, Tehreek Labaik Ya Rasulullah, a Barelvi offshoot, they've shut down cities, including the capital. They've not wanted to negotiate. They were quite hard on their demands, and they've won. The government has caved in. The ministers resigned. How do you feel? It seems as if the government has caved in to extremists.
You see, the position is that the government of the day has lost its writ. You see, since the departure of Mian Nawaz Sharif, who were declared disqualified under the Constitution of Pakistan and application of Article 62 and 63, he was declared by the apex court of the country as a person who was disqualified. Since his departure, see, there is a government which is working, and we have a prime minister. I call him a proxy prime minister because, fortunately or unfortunately, he does not enjoy the power which a prime minister of such an important country should enjoy. See. So therefore, this was for 22 days there was total. Everything has come to a grinding halt, standstill, and until and unless the armed forces of Pakistan intervened, and in less than 24 hours, because the Pakistan armed forces are highly respected institution in our country, because people feel it's a highly disciplined.
Certainly, if you'll allow me to interrupt here. If the armed forces intervened and are highly respected, and they are the ones that clinched the deal, what did Pakistan get out of it? Because these guys seem to have completely won. And at the beginning of the sit-in and the protest, I must let you know, I met with this group. I spent time among them. They weren't joking about. They also want Asia Bibi executed. They call her a terrorist. They want the blasphemy laws to be more powerfully implemented, and so on, beyond the resignation of the minister. So if the armed forces came in and they're so well trusted, what did the Pakistani state get back? Because it doesn't seem as if they got anything back. It seems as if Tehreek, Labaik Ya Rasulullah have won everything here.
You see, the position is that the government of the day dropped two major section 7B and 7C from the Election Act of 2017, and both these section deals with the prophethood of Holy Prophet of Islam, that he was the last prophet, and this is an article of faith with every Muslim anywhere in the world. Now, these two provisions were dropped. Many people feel that they were dropped because the Americans were pressurizing and pestering the government of Pakistan from a couple of weeks that they should drop section 295B, which is a blasphemy law, and these two sections which I have just mentioned, 7B and 7.3, regarding the prophethood of the Holy Prophet.
So do you support keeping it as it is? Do you support keeping it as it is and not amending it?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so let me... No, it's interesting.
Just a minute.
Yeah. Finish your point.
Fortunately, one of those people who in 1974, I was then member of parliament, we were about 20 people who moved a resolution, and on the basis of that resolution, the Ahmadis were declared non-Muslim. The rest of the member of parliament have died. I am the only surviving member of parliament who was a signatory of that important resolution, on the basis of which the Ahmadis were declared as non-Muslim.
On this point, you and those Barelvi extremists are on the same page then, because they told me, they said, we don't want, as they call them, Qadianis, we don't want them in government. This is going to open the door to them coming into government. Therefore, this must go away. This is an insult to us. It is blasphemy.
Because
so, in this sense, you agree with them.
It's Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Okay. It's Islamic Republic of Pakistan, which came into being on the slogan of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. So, a country which came into being on the basis of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, there, if you drop a section of the law which deals with the last prophethood of Holy Prophet, well, that you are committing
I'm glad you told us this. No, I'm glad you made it clear to us that you support this point of view. Ahmed Rashid, what can we learn from this? The protests, the aftermath, and what this means, given that the government has said, okay, we'll accede to your demands.
Well, I think it's been humiliating both for the government and for the military, because the military came in, when the military came in, they came in on the invitation of the civilian government, which had reached an impasse after 18 days of these people demonstrating and the demonstrations spreading to other parts of the country. The government failed to deal with it. They called in the army, but then the army did nothing, and actually then helped broker the deal with this group. And in that deal, there are about a dozen points, and all those points go in favor of the group. None of them go in favor of the government. And people have been very, very angry at this, that not only the government, but the army is also allowed such a deal to go through. Now, as far as the oath is concerned, the law minister, Mr. Zahid Ahmed, did went back and corrected the mistake that had been made. He called it a clerical error. He apologized, but this group was still demanding his head, and in fact, he was forced to resign. Now, if street protests are able to force government ministers to resign, and with the backing of the military and the whole state apparatus, it's a very poor reflection of democracy and the state effectiveness in Pakistan.
Taha Siddiqui, how do you think the state has handled this?
Well, it depends on which state you're talking about. Basically, in Pakistan, there is definitely the government, which is the civilian government, and then there is also the military, which is called the deep state. Now, as the earlier participant also mentioned, the military was basically involved in this whole episode. In actually, from what we understand, when the protesters came in and they sat down, there was a tweet that was issued from the army chief, and that basically said that both sides should refrain from violence, which reflects that how the military became an independent party and was not serving the government. And then we have also reports that the government tried to tell the military to come in and control the situation, and still the military was hesitant. The military did not go in, and then eventually the military was the one that brokered the deal. And one of the leaders, the Khadim Rizvi, he's come on TV recently only and said that it was the military that brought in the resignation. Then also that particular document thanks the army chief. So definitely, as far as the state handling is concerned, the government has weakened because of this whole episode, and the army has come out as a sort of a victor and with a better standing. And that's what we understand here. Many of us here feel that this was not just about the law. This was not just about the law minister. This was about a greater design, and the design was to further undermine the civilian government, which we've seen repeatedly happening within this government before that, and sort of because we're moving towards the elections, and with the popularity that the ruling party enjoys, to dent that. So it has a bigger and greater design, and the state, some elements of state are involved in it.
Okay. Ahmed Rashid, I want you to listen to what Ahsan Iqbal, the Interior Minister, had to say to us. My colleague Ali Mustafa spoke to him very recently on our program, Straight Talk. Have a little listen to what he had to say about criticism regarding the deal.
Let me assure you that state is fully prepared to deal with any such incident. It is not that few people can take us hostage. It is not that they can dictate their agendas. We were very careful because of the nature of the issue, and also because of the coming election period, where we don't want anyone to get an excuse to become victim, play victim, or to excite unnecessarily people's religious sentiments. So we have dealt with it, but in Pakistan, majority of the people do not subscribe to any extreme version of religion.
Ahmed Rashid, he was very confident that they did it the right way. Do you buy that?
No, unfortunately I don't, because frankly they were totally ineffective. look, there were no more than 2,000 or 3,000 demonstrators in Islamabad, and there were over 8,000 or 10,000 police who were watching over them. I don't think it would have been a problem if the police had gone in peacefully, obviously without guns or anything like that, and tried to round up. Now, they did arrest hundreds of the demonstrators, which have now been freed. But they didn't move in effectively. And I think the police were very scared. There were very confusing, contradictory orders being given to the police during this time. And finally, when the government decided to call in the army, which is perfectly constitutional, because it's a clause which says that the army can come in support of civilian power, the army also did nothing. And the government was completely taken aback by that. And very quickly, this deal was struck in which one government minister had to resign, another government minister in Punjab province is under scrutiny to resign. Compensation was given to the protesters.
Right.
All the infrastructure damaged in the protest for 3 weeks was going to be paid for by the government. The protesters suffered nothing. They were not punished for anything, for breaking government property, for demonstrating, for holding up traffic or anything like that.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the government has lost a lot of ground,
right.
And where the army has gained strength.
Ahmed Raza Kasuri, let me then ask you what happens next, because as I said, the resignation of the minister was one of their demands. They had other demands, such as the execution of Asia Bibi. They proudly held up the image of Mumtaz Qadri, the man who, in cold blood, executed, murdered an elected official for speaking out against the blasphemy laws, right? So this guy was their hero, and they weren't afraid to show that. They want alleged blasphemers to be killed, whether in the courts or on the streets. This is from me speaking to them. So let me ask you then, if they're going to get what they want when it comes to a politician resigning, what comes next? When they call for the execution of alleged blasphemers, is the state going to say, okay?
You see, the position is that the issue was very sensitive, and people are very particular about the dignity and reverence of Holy Prophet, because the whole religions open up with the love of Holy Prophet. So this is totally a different issue altogether. What people are saying, that if tomorrow another 2,000 people come and they ask government to do this, or resign, one of them should resign, I don't think the government would take it lightly. They will resist. But this was an issue which could spread like a cancerous growth in the body politic of Pakistan. And everybody saw that in all the main cities of Pakistan, there was total demonstration and lockout and,
But not necessarily, sir. These were a couple thousand people. They're an offshoot of the Barelvis, right? So they're not even the mainstream Barelvis. They're an offshoot of the Barelvis. When I was with them, there were a few hundred. It grew. They went from Lahore to Islamabad. When I came across them, there were a few hundred after Jummah on a Friday. This wasn't tens of thousands of Pakistanis who were angry about the change to the law and the minister who had taken to the streets. This was a very small subsect who have got the government to blink, sir.
You see, the Mia Nawaz Sharif plan and strategy, since his departure from the government, he was constantly hitting two institutions, the Supreme Court of Pakistan, which is the apex court of the country, blatant violation of all the norms of decency. He was hitting hard the Supreme Court and indirectly, not directly, indirectly criticizing the armed forces of Pakistan. Now, this whole stunt, many people are of the view, was created that if the army were to enter into this facade and they open up fire, the army image and their reputation and their respect will lowered. And who will be the beneficiary? Mian Nawaz Sharif.
Okay.
And if they do not take action, then they will say that General Bajwa is probably is friendly toward the Ahmadis.
Okay,
so
you're not a fan of the
difficult situation. That's why, just let me finish. That's why when the army came, army made a public statement that the people's love, affection, and the confidence in the armed forces is the biggest asset of the armed forces of Pakistan. We will not disperse the crowd. We will only take care of the government installation like the Parliament and Supreme Court, the Pakistan Television Station, Radio Pakistan, and all other official building. That we will take care. But as far as dispersing of the crowd is concerned, that is the domain of the police and the rangers.
Okay. Taha Siddiqui, where do we go from here? Is democracy damaged, hurt, weakening? What's going to happen now?
Definitely, I mean, from as I was explaining earlier, the civilian space for the politicians and the parliament has been lost. And this is not the first time now that decisions are being made on streets. And we've seen that in the past, there were indications that, the military establishment was behind it. In 2014, when Imran Khan did a similar sort of sit-in right in front of the parliament, one of his own deputies came out and said that he was being instructed by generals. And then there were reports similar to that. Earlier on in 2012 and 13, we saw Tahirul Qadri also coming and doing the same. And every time the democracy and the parliament has been weakened, further weakened. And again, this time around, we're seeing how the civilian government has lost space, the parliament has lost space, legitimacy, and we're already hearing of further protest planned in the coming days. So basically, there are powers in the country that do not want the parliament to run smoothly. There are powers that do not want the civilian government and the civilians to flourish, the civilian setup to flourish, and they want it they want to paralyze it, and that's what we've seen. This last week, what happened was a paralysis of Islamabad, paralysis of the Pakistani government, and it is just to show that and then they get what they want because the military establishment is basically trying to also mainstream these radicals, not just Tehreek-e-Labbaik Ya Rasool, but also there's another group called the Milli Muslim League, which is from Jamaat-ud-Dawa, and a former general came on TV very recently and said that there is a plan to mainstream these radical Islamist groups, to de-radicalize them, as they say. But it's not just to de-radicalize them, it's to push their proxies into parliament, and push their proxies onto streets, and then control the government.
And the mainstreaming of extremist groups and alleged extremist groups is another topic that I want to have one or more of you on for in the not too distant future. But for the moment, I have to move on. So gentlemen, I thank you very much for joining us. Taha Siddiqui, Ahmed Raza Qasuri, and Ahmed Rashid.
Welcome.
Thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Still ahead, 5 years in prison for discussing democracy. We look at how an imprisoned Taiwanese activist is pushing Beijing and Taipei further apart. And Kenya's president starts his second term, but the opposition still refuses to recognize his presidency. Is there more unrest ahead? The relationship between China and Taiwan hasn't been great at the best of times, but the Taiwanese president says ties have been damaged even further by a recent Chinese court ruling. Taiwanese pro-democracy activist Li Ming-che was sentenced to 5 years in prison. China has charged him with trying to subvert the state, but Li's family says he's done nothing wrong. Taiwan's government has called on Beijing to release him. Vanessa Keneally reports.
Sitting silently as they hear their fate.
First, defendant Peng Yuhua, guilty of subversion of state power, is sentenced to 7 years of imprisonment and is deprived of political rights for 2 years. Second, defendant Li Ming-che, guilty of subversion of state power, is sentenced to 5 years of imprisonment and deprived of political rights for 2 years.
Taiwanese activist Li Ming-che spoke only to acknowledge his future.
I accept the judgment and I will not appeal.
His Chinese co-worker said nothing. But their supporters in Hong Kong refused to stay quiet.
I think Li Mingjie was forced to do that and forced to plead guilty, and it's a warning from the Chinese Communist Party. If you want to, sort of what their words interfere in Chinese internal affairs, supporting human rights, then you will be arrested.
That's something Beijing doesn't deny.
Anyone in the mainland should abide by the mainland's legal rules and public orders, and anyone who violates the law will be brought to justice.
Li was a volunteer for the Taiwan Association for Human Rights. For a decade, he'd been travelling to and from mainland China until March, when he suddenly disappeared and was then arrested. The charges against him include circulating articles criticising Beijing's leadership, as well as pushing for a revolution. In China, enough to be put behind bars. Human rights activists in China aren't the only people angry over the sentences handed down this week. Taiwan's presidential office called the verdict unacceptable, saying, "We urge the Beijing authorities to release Li and allow him to return to Taiwan soon. We regret that Li's case has seriously damaged cross-strait relations." And this diplomatic dispute looks set to shake an already fragile arrangement. Beijing considers Taiwan to be part of its territory, but Taipei has other ideas. It's been a self-ruling island since 1949, when China's nationalist government fled there after being ousted from the mainland by Mao Zedong's Communist Party.
On that island sanctuary, the nationalists rebuilt their military forces toward the day when the China mainland might be liberated.
Since then, polls regularly show Taiwanese are generally happy with being independent. The economy has done well, although it's partly dependent on Beijing. But the imprisonment of these two activists has angered many in Taiwan and is being seen as an attempt by Beijing to flex its muscles. If so, will the threat of jail be enough to scare away those critical of its power? Vanessa Keneally, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Washington is Melissa Newcomb. She's a research manager at the Global Taiwan Institute. And in Beijing, Victor Gao, he's the chairman of the International Committee of Beijing Private Equity Association. I thank you both for joining us. Melissa, let me begin with you. 5 years in prison for Li Mingjie for those social media posts. Subversion, is that justice?
Is it justice? It depends on who you ask. The charges of subversion are very questionable charges to begin with. They're largely catch-all terms that boil down to doing something that the PRC government doesn't agree with. Is it true that he was subverting the state? In the eyes of the PRC government, that's probably true, but what was he doing and where was he doing those things are questionable in terms of whether or not they were illegal.
Victor Gao, Amnesty International, says his so-called confession is highly dubious and was most likely extracted under extreme duress. Is he a political prisoner, Victor?
I don't think so. I think the China State Security Ministry was involved in doing the investigation, and the final charges upon which he was convicted with were national security, state security violations. And just now, your reporter also mentioned that Mr. Li was involved in revolution or overthrowing the Chinese government. And I think the Chinese authorities must have found evidence linking Mr. Li with these revolutionary undertakings, which the Chinese government probably thought were aimed at overthrowing the Chinese government. The Chinese government spokesman also alleged that Mr. Li was trying to impose the political values in Taiwan onto mainland China. And I hope Mr. Li will serve much less than 5 years, and I hope he will be either paroled or released at a shortened sentence very soon, and I hope he will join his family and friends in Taiwan sooner rather than later.
Very interesting that they've said he wanted to start a Western color revolution. It's the same words they've recently used in Cambodia against Kem Sokha, but that's a different story. Nevertheless, fascinating. Melissa, Victor Gao's hopeful
Yes.
that the state has enough evidence. Tell me why you're not as hopeful.
Well, it's not that I'm not hopeful, it's just that if they have so much evidence, where can we see it? A lot of the allegations made against him are allegedly posts that he made while he was in Taiwan, and I'm not sure if they were inciting revolution. I haven't read these posts myself, but most likely they were simply talking about his past and Taiwan's past with authoritarianism and fighting for democracy. Whether or not that is inciting revolution in China, I cannot say, but I doubt that they have the evidence that they are charging him with.
Melissa, what's the message by this sentence? What's the message to the couple of million Taiwanese who are currently living in China?
I think it's a message to Taiwanese people in general, and especially people in Taiwan who focus on human rights and civil society. The message, I'm sorry?
Go ahead, go ahead.
Oh, yes, so the message is that be careful, we're watching you. That is the message that the sentence it gives to people in Taiwan, and it is definitely putting a chill over civil society activists' activities. And it's definitely making them pause and reconsider how they will speak with their counterparts in China and their friends in China even, or their families. Many people have cross-strait marriages, cross-strait families. It's definitely putting a chill over cross-strait relations in general.
Okay, so Victor Gao, whatever the facts of the case itself, is the consequence of it that what people call the 3 Ts, Tiananmen, Tibet, and Taiwan, that Chinese people generally should steer clear of, does that extend to the Taiwanese people? That if you talk about this stuff and you say things that are a little bit spicy and the government doesn't like in Beijing, be careful, you're going to be nabbed and you're going to go to jail.
No, I do not personally agree with this assessment. Right now, there are millions of people in Taiwan who now work and live in mainland China. They, generally speaking, have a lot of freedom moving around back and forth, going back to Taiwan, coming back to mainland China. There is a lot of cross-strait marriages, for example, and Chinese investments are going more and more into Taiwan. Chinese tourists from mainland visit Taiwan regularly. On any given day, there are hundreds of thousands of people from Taiwan touring all parts of mainland, and I think most of them will have no problem in navigating through all the situations in China. And also, don't forget, in recent years, China have put people into prison sentences from Canada, from the United States, from Japan on state security violations. And these countries also have some protests, but eventually they calm down.
Melissa, very finally, President Tsai Ing-wen has been criticized by many Taiwanese activists for not speaking up vociferously enough about this case. So Taiwan has criticized the sentencing, but there are some who believe that they haven't criticized Beijing enough. Is that fair?
Well, I think this just goes to show the beauty of Taiwan's democracy in that its citizens can criticize its president when they don't agree with what she is doing. I cannot speak on behalf of the president's office. I will say that I am an admirer of her, and I think that they have tried the best that they can to deal with a very difficult situation. Please consider that if she were to be extremely vocal in the media about this case, I think it would only negatively impact Li Mingzhi. Beijing might try to punish her by punishing him even more severely.
Okay, Melissa Newcomb and Victor Gao, I've got to move on, but I thank you both for joining us here on the Newsmakers.
We have said this coming month of December, on the 12th, we shall have a People's Assembly that will swear me into office.
It took 2 elections, but Uhuru Kenyatta is confirmed once again as Kenya's president. At a lavish inauguration ceremony, he said he wanted to unite the nation. But right now, that seems like quite a challenge. The country is deeply divided. Opposition leader Raila Odinga, who boycotted the last election, says he'll hold his own rival inauguration in December. All the while, tension continues to simmer on the streets. Social media is rife with reports that Kenyan police are suppressing opposition rallies, and it's clear the political crisis is far from over. Well, to discuss this and more, I'm joined from London by Kimani Ichung'wah. He's a member of the Kenyan National Assembly with the ruling Jubilee Party. In Nairobi, Miguna, he's an advocate of the High Court of Kenya and a former advisor to Raila Odinga. And to complete our panel, we have Farah Maalim. He's the former Deputy Speaker of Kenya's Parliament. Gentlemen, I thank you very much for joining us. Miguna, let me begin with you. More than 70 people have been killed so far in election season. This is extremely contested. Raila Odinga might actually have a legal case. He might actually have a political case to make. But is he putting people in harm's way by wanting to have a rival inauguration ceremony, given that so much blood has been shed so far?
No, he's not. The people who are responsible for the ongoing ethnic cleansing and genocide against NASA supporters are President Uhuru and William Ruto. We have to be able to name the perpetrators of the crime. Demonstration is allowed under our constitution and the laws. The demonstrators and people who have been going to Raila's functions, firstly, have been unarmed. Many of them, many of the people that have been killed, brutally murdered, are children who did not attend any functions. They were killed while playing in their homes. So Raila is not responsible for what is going on. What is going on is an illegitimate government trying to impose itself on the people of Kenya that rejected them on August 8th and stayed home on October 26th. What we had on October 26th was not an election. It was not credible, it was not transparent, it was not verifiable.
Okay, let me
and
bring
if
in
the
Kimani.
Supreme Court had not been threatened...
Okay, Miguna,
yes.
let me bring in Kimani, because we've sort of covered this before,
yes.
and fair enough. Yes, you dispute it and you believe the Supreme Court had been threatened, even though you supported their decision in the first round, you feel they were threatened, and that's why they caved in the second. That's NASA's position, but something that you said has been really interesting here. It stood out for me, and I want to ask Kimani. Kimani, Miguna has used the words ethnic cleansing and genocide. Is that what's happening?
Miguna and his cohorts in the NASA, or the National Resistance Militia that they set up, are desperate for such headline-catching news like ethnic cleansing. But in actual fact, what is happening is that Raila Odinga and his brigade within the militia are the ones who are profiling their own people, their own supporters, by putting them, as you said, in harm's way. You cannot, by all means, decide to use all extra-legal, extra-constitutional means to get into power and expect that you will be treated with civility and be accorded the respect that you ought to be accorded as
Kimani,
a democratic leader who
Kimani,
believes
what does
in
that
democracy.
mean? Because let me,
therefore,
certainly, so let me ask you what that means, because last week on the show you said that Raila should now be treated as a criminal, right? Then Odinga's camp comes out.
I maintain...
No, certainly. Okay, so let me just finish the question. You say he should be treated as a criminal. Then his camp comes out and they say 5 of his supporters, including, I think, the driver of his daughter, were killed by police. So people are dying on the streets, and you as a member of the government and the ruling party, you're saying he should be treated as a criminal. It's not hard to see how people would make a leap and say, well, maybe then the government is using the police to target NASA and to target Raila and those around him. You can see that, right? Because you yourself have said he should be treated as a criminal.
Let me say this, Imran, and I want to repeat. I did assert last week that indeed Raila Odinga should be treated like any other common criminal who incites people along ethnic lines. The other truth that people may be interested in is that many of these deaths are also not subject to police, what has been sold as police brutality. There are indications now that indeed this militia that Raila Odinga set up might be. And these are issues that are subject to investigations. It is my belief that the police and all other investigative bodies, including human rights activists, will be on this to investigate whether this militia is in actual sense specifically targeting children. Because you may need to ask yourself, what coincidence is it that every time there is a demonstration, even in areas like Pipeline and Bakassi last week, the other day, where the young, unfortunate incident of a 7-year-old boy was shot at a balcony of his house when he was playing. There are indications, there are people who have given testimony that indeed the person who shot this man was an armed civilian who fled off in a motorcycle. Therefore, when I assert that Raila Odinga is leading a group of hoodlums and criminals, it is indeed coming out clearly that they are even targeting. They are so desperate to paint our country as a country that is collapsing. They are desperate to ignite violence across the board.
So Miguna says the state is targeting NASA supporters, and especially adding ethnic lines to that with the Luo and so forth. And you're saying they have their own militia. Farah Ma'alim, what is going on right now? Let me ask you very sort of directly. You're a supporter of the opposition, but at this moment in time, would you accept Uhuru Kenyatta as your president and give him a chance to lead?
Abraham, let me tell you what has, I'll answer your question, what has bedeviled our country for the last, since we got independence. There has been contestations of power between, from the beginning, the first president and the first vice president, who are the fathers of Raila and Uhuru Kenyatta. And then, of course, the Moi factor came into it, where an alliance was built between two communities, that is the mountain region and the Rift Valley Kalenjins, so as to try and corner power. Now, every politician you see out there, personally, I come from Northeastern Province. I don't need Uhuru, and I don't need the blessings of Raila to become an MP in my constituency. Ours is more akin to the kind of divides and the considerations in Somalia. It's clanism and a few other things, and occasionally it's the same clan in most of these areas, and nobody needs. You can come in with any party as long as you're popular at the individual level. So I think, given that background, I'll probably be one of the very few politicians in this country who can give a very objective analysis of the problems we have now. I can tell you very authoritatively, there has never been a free and fair election in this country except the one that was conducted in 1962 under the British colonial government, and the one that was conducted in 2002 when Kibaki emerged as the leader.
So Farah, if they were all rigged, would you accept Uhuru Kenyatta during this one, even though in the second round he got 98%, Raila didn't run, no matter what, for the sake of stability or otherwise, would you accept him and give him a chance to lead?
Look, I had said that before. I come from a constituency, I had come from a constituency or a county that bordered Somalia. And I know what it means to have a failed state. And I don't want that to happen to Kenya.
Right.
I want to see a situation in which Uhuru is able to reach out to Raila, fully aware of the fact that there were issues that essentially in a clear and a clean democratic calculations that can put questions to their own legitimacy as a party as well as a president. But because the same court, let me just finish, the same court that we had hailed its own decision when they nullified has upheld it. Right. I have got a legal background myself. I have, like Miguna, of course, not as good as Miguna. Miguna is a senior legal personality and a senior learned friend. But having said that, I still would think there is a possibility in which Uhuru can play out his term as 5 years, but use this opportunity to reach out and to make sure that we are not going to have any more electoral impunities in this country for forever. Forever. In the absence of that,
Okay, so Farah, let me take what you said and pose it to Miguna. Hold on, Farah.
Clearly just...
Please, if you don't mind, and I apologize for interrupting you. I want to bring the others in. Let me take what you said and pose it to Miguna here. I'm not going to debate you over Kenyan law and whether the Supreme Court was right or wrong in both round 1 or round 2, Miguna. You're a legal man. But something I will take you up on is your use of the words genocide and ethnic cleansing. These are legal terms under international law, and they need a high bar of proof in order to pass that standard. So we have Farah saying that Uhuru must reach out to Raila and the two must talk to each other. And that would be great for everybody concerned, possibly because there might be peace and no unrest on the streets. But if you genuinely believe in your heart, Miguna, that they are ethnically cleansing you and they are committing genocide, you're not going to talk to them, are you? So either they're not committing ethnic cleansing and genocide and you might be able to talk to them, or they are committing ethnic cleansing and genocide, and I don't know, you might need the UN Security Council to authorize troops.
Yes, Imran, Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto are illegitimate. They were not elected by the Kenyan people, and they are perpetrating genocide and ethnic cleansing targeted primarily at the Luos and also NASA supporters. When Raila Odinga arrived from the UK last Friday, he was unarmed. He was accompanied by his daughter and his sister and other aides that he came with. We welcomed him at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. He was welcomed by hundreds of thousands to almost nearly 1 million of innocent, unarmed civilians. They were mowed down by live bullets. These were targeted killings. They were deliberate, they were calculated, and they killed civilians in cold blood. These are international crimes that must be investigated. These two people are not new to the International Criminal Court. They already faced charges there. And the only reason they got out of those charges is because they killed all the witnesses. Now they have killed more people than died in one day during the 2007
Miguna, 10 years ago, the ICC was also looking at
violence.
10 years ago, the ICC was also looking at crimes allegedly committed by your side, right? So if we're going to use that as an example, then everybody has blood on their hands.
But the person, no, Imran, to correct you, the person they charged on our so-called side was William Ruto, who is Uhuru Kenyatta's deputy. They did not charge Raila Odinga. So we have to speak from facts. William Ruto now wields state power and is using the same tactics that he used in 2007 to continue to commit crimes against unarmed civilians. This time, we have to take him down. Okay. We have to take him down legally, and we must take him down politically.
Let me ask you, Kimani,
and we are serious.
We're running out. Okay.
We are not recognizing these two illegitimate people.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you. Kimani, let me ask you very finally, because we're running out of time, and I apologize. This moves really, really fast. Kimani, will Uhuru Kenyatta reach out? Because he has to. You don't want bloodshed on the streets. You don't want civil war in your country. Will he reach out to Raila and try to find a way out of this so the two men can sit together?
Imran, let me say Uhuru Kenyatta, as he alluded to in his speech during his inauguration, he is ready and willing to reach out to as many Kenyans as he can in an effort to unite the country and for us to be focused on nation building. The only thing I do not think, and I would not even imagine Uhuru Kenyatta doing, is to reach out to Raila Odinga in an effort to reward him for using violence against his own people, profiling his own ethnic community, and therefore defeating the very essence of democracy, that all you need to do in a democratic electoral process is to cause violence, for you to be spoken to, for you to have a shared government. If Uhuru Kenyatta is speaking to Raila Odinga in terms of how we move the country forward, that is very welcome. But any talk around sharing of government is unwelcome and should not be entertained. Raila Odinga is somebody, and Miguna has written an entire book, so many chapters, disparaging Raila Odinga for his belief in in undemocratic ways of acquiring power, his belief in violence, his belief in profiling people along ethnic lines. Miguna himself has written at length about those issues. Therefore, Raila Odinga should not even be imagining that the world will rally behind him. That is why you saw him the other day in Washington, D.C., disparaging even Western diplomats, saying they have been compromised by the Jubilee administration. And they are only compromised because they do not support his
Imran, if I could respond.
His vigor in trying to achieve power through violence.
Okay, so very finally, Miguna,
we
in 20
must
seconds,
condemn
please.
him and condemn the violence that is perpetuating in our country.
Your response to Kimani?
Yes, Kimani is completely incorrect. My book was a memoir. It is not about Raila Odinga. And I criticize equally Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto and the former president Mwai Kibaki, who stole elections in 2007 and engaged in ethnic cleansing the same way Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto are doing. My book was about justice, and I stand for justice now, the same way I stood for justice when I wrote the book.
So we've got
there
your
is absolutely no way Kimani Ichung'wah
can twist my book.
person
who has been tweeting, inciting Kenyans against each other, telling them to take up arms.
Okay, so gentlemen, if you'll allow me, I want to bring in Farah Maalim very finally. Farah Maalim, please, in 30 seconds, can you wrap us up? Because I'm well over time, but I want to give you an opportunity, Farah Maalim. 30 seconds, please.
Let me tell you, we have a history in this country, and that history is if tomorrow Uhuru Kenyatta would say that I am going to reach out to my brother Raila Odinga and I'm going to involve him in a power sharing format, the same Kimani Ichung'wah who is jumping up and down now saying you cannot involve him in a coalition will be out there singing the same thing. Trust Uhuru's intuition in these things. I think he has the country at heart and he wants to unite it. He understands what exactly happens and he's not going to play around with flattery and the kind of stuff. And there's also the issue of 2022, what do you call the succession of 2022. There are too many things that are playing into this that is all based on selfishness. But I have a feeling Uhuru will rise above that and he will come and save this country and unite this country one more time.
Gentlemen, I'd love to have...
We need to unite. We need to unite this country. We need to unite this country, and I think Uhuru has the goodwill. He doesn't have to listen to these folks around him who are only worried about their own validation.
Farah, I've got to wrap, gentlemen. I thank you very much for joining us, for sharing your opinions. I hope to have you on the program again. Kimani Ichung'wah, Miguna, and Farah Maalim.
Thank you, Imran.
Thank you very much for your time. Thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.